Welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I had the pleasure of speaking with designer and fabricator Sam Keene. Enjoy.
Yo.
Hey.
What's up, dude?
Not too much. Wow, good to hear your beautiful voice. It's been a while.
Same. What's up? What you been working on?
Yeah, this has been a big year for us. I feel like it's our third year as a company, and I think we finally reached the point where we don't have to worry so much about keeping the lights on, and we're kind of now able to really focus in on making new design work and like really kind of furthering our like creative endeavors, and also just moving away from being a fabrication shop for other companies and really more towards just promoting our own stuff.
And this is KLN Studio.
You got it. Yep.
So you started off fabricating for other people, like aiding other people in their projects?
Yeah, so our company started with the three of us. We've been studio mates for years. I've been sharing space with the two of them for at least 9 years now, I think. And initially it was for us to pursue our own private art practices, and for me it was always kind of revolving around functional art and furniture. But yeah, we did a variety of things, and we would often like team up on larger projects where we would get a commission to do an installation for somebody, or say another furniture company or design store had already designed things, they needed someone to fabricate them. That was kind of how we would keep things moving while we were also working on our own kind of independent projects. And then starting KLN, we made a decision to kind of consolidate and collapse our individual design work into one more cohesive portfolio and start promoting that under KLN. And then at the same time, offer services for other artists and designers in the tri-state area to get like CNC cutting, design engineering, fabrication, things like that. And it's been really great. We still do a good amount of that. But yeah, I feel like this year we've kind of made a bit of a turn and focused a lot more on just further expanding our own furniture collection and really thinking about kind of us as a design company rather than a fabrication shop.
Right. And you went to school for industrial design, is that correct?
No, I actually didn't. I was a double major in history and studio art.
What the hell is studio art?
Well, that's what they called it at Pitzer. But yeah, basically, the like classic definition is just like drawing, painting, sculpture, like visual arts that aren't performed, I guess.
Okay.
So yeah, and just as broad and vague as that sounds, it's basically like what the education was. So really for me, I kind of found my love for all of this in the wood shop there originally. There was a few classes that were like mixed media, functional art courses where we would have to kind of imagine and build like collaboratively shared living spaces to accommodate different things, and then also do like kind of like functional art and furniture that we would then have to like live with and kind of write about our experience, like living and interacting with the objects that we make.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was a cool program. But that got me really excited about furniture. I always loved making things, and sculpture was always really interesting to me, and working in like 3D space was always interesting to me. But you know, a lot of it probably has to do with just imposter syndrome, you know, but just feeling like I would have to justify every move I made in a sculpture with some larger theoretical concept that had to be coherent and have me like able to argue it and justify my thought process. And the way I entered design and furniture was like allowing me to really focus and fixate on like form and color and texture and like feel, and not feel the burden to justify it.
Rationally.
So yeah, exactly. Apart from the fact that it served a purpose, like, so yeah, I always thought that was interesting.
Which aspect? The fact that you needed to, academically
justify certain moves.
I mean, I definitely understand what you're saying, and I suppose it could yield good results for certain people's process, but I do think it's a hindrance for most people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, it also, I would agree with that. And, you know, it has so much to do with just your own creative process and like way of making. And for me, I've always done it pretty like tactily. Like I like to be evolving and developing ideas like in the studio, making physical maquettes and pushing and pulling things that could also happen in like 3D space on a computer. But yeah, I think for me, it's kind of figuring out what I can do with the materials themselves in real space has always been kind of the jumping off point for me. But anyways, yeah, going back to this course in college, that was kind of where I started. And then I got really excited about the idea of furniture as a thing that I could pour my creative energy into, but then also be making things that people wouldn't just look at, they would live with and experience on a like more intimate kind of day-to-day way. And I found a furniture maker in LA that I ended up actually doing a pretty like old school apprenticeship with. I would work for him for a couple days a week while I was finishing up my degree. And yeah, it was like a really special experience that I feel really lucky to have had. It was a very small operation. Him and his wife ran everything. They had a small showroom in West Hollywood, and then he made everything with me once I started working there, but prior just by himself in his like studio that he set up in his garage behind his house.
Wow.
So yeah, I would just show up at his place and we would work all day. We would have lunch with, you know, his family and his like 2-year-old daughter, and me ended up becoming pretty close friends. Yeah, it was just like a really special way to learn a skill set.
How did that come about? Exactly. That's the reason I ask is I think a lot of people would benefit from such an arrangement, but it isn't clear exactly how that would occur for most people.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really lucky apart from the fact that I just trolled the internet for all LA furniture makers that were doing work I thought was cool. Mm-hmm. I just kind of emailed a bunch of people cold and started explaining what I was interested in. I was fortunate enough to be in a position where, you know, I was ahead in my credits for school. I could go part-time and still finish on time. And it took the financial burden off of me having to, you know, require like a decent wage for the first few months that I worked for him. I would say within like 3 months, I was at a level where I was competent enough that it wasn't me getting an education as much as me, helping him actually make money. So he started paying me, granted, not a lot. But yeah, I think that honestly is it's a system that like doesn't really exist anymore outside of like building trades and union structures and stuff like that. I think as a like person trying to do a more creative thing, you're either in like a big organization doing unpaid internships that, don't often amount to much, and you're not getting tangible skills from doing those because you're, running to get people coffee and stuff, and they're not actually trusting you or teaching you to do the things that they are doing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here. I just not talking. Yeah. So, like, in respect to the CNC, when did you get introduced to that? Were you working with a CNC when you were apprenticing with him, or no?
No. So he was pretty old school. Like he learned all this kind of fine furniture, finished carpentry, woodworking stuff from his uncle. And he actually was like out in LA originally trying to make it as an actor and musician, and was working at a hardware store and had all of this kind of knowledge just from his like upbringing. He was from this like small town in Louisiana, and yeah, he was just doing handyman stuff for like wealthy people in the Hollywood Hills, and they would ask him if he was able to do, like make a new door for them or something, and the requests started getting more complex, and he started realizing that a lot of his like creative energy that was being kind of wasted going to these like cold call interviews or whatever, or auditions, he could put into woodworking. Yeah, that was kind of how he started. He like grew from word of mouth from being the handyman for this fancy hardware store in Hollywood.
So you went to college, then you effectively interned or were an apprentice for this guy. Mm-hmm. And then how do we get to where you are now? So I met James and Toby, my two business partners, working for a design build architecture studio. They do a lot of different things, but C2 Studio in Brooklyn. C2. Yeah, it's SITU. And yeah, we were all hired there. We worked together maybe for all of us there at once, maybe for like 9 months or something. But yeah, we were fast friends, and it was kind of where we started our kind of building our like social network in New York. We were all transplants, so we moved here when we were like 23 or 24, and yeah, kind of gravitated towards one another, and all of us were pretty hungry to keep kind of making our own things independently outside of what we did for a living for work. And I was looking for studio space and really quickly realizing that I couldn't afford anything. And then yeah, I basically talked to the two of them to see if they were interested in going in on this little share behind another small architecture studio's shop. They would give us access to their wood studio and a few other things. And yeah, that's kind of how it all started. But yeah, that was also where all three of us were introduced to digital fabrication in more of like a hands-on technical sense. We learned. What is digital fabrication? Is it like CNC work? Yeah, exactly. So basically it's designing in 3D space on a computer software and then translating that through like CNC, through laser cutters, 3D printers, whatever. Okay. Basically just having like the start be digital. Right. And a design build, for people who don't know, how would you describe that? I mean, the name says it all, but
when I first heard the term, I was not entirely sure what it meant specifically.
Yeah, so like traditional architecture, it's exclusively a design service where you're producing drawings, you're getting building permits, you're coordinating things, and you're always working in tandem with a general contractor or another company that's actually doing the physical building of the thing.
Yeah.
In recent decades, it's mostly for smaller scale, more boutique firms and projects as well. Having an all-in-one design and build operation streamlines things, allows for more kind of technically complex builds and installations because the same company that's engineering and thinking through the design work is also responsible for seeing its final execution. So there's something like beneficial there.
Sure.
And for me too, as a, just starting to think as a designer, I thought it was really, really helpful to be in an environment where the people designing the things were making the things, or at least were right upstairs from the people making the things. Having that, like, a lot of architects, if you speak to them and they haven't had that experience, it's a really enviable way to learn how to improve, how to like think through different problems. So yeah, that's the design build.
And if you were to talk about what a fabrication company does, I know this might seem like it's semantics, but I'm even asking from a place of genuine curiosity when trying to define what I'm doing. But would you say there's a difference between design build and a fabrication company? And what is KLN in the most concise way of speaking about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like when you're thinking about design, for me, design build applies more to like the architecture world, whereas like fabrication spans architecture, design. It really just means people making the thing. A fabrication company that designs and then builds their own thing is a design build company. I think for our purposes, because we do a bit of all of that, where someone will reach out and say, I have this nook in my house and I want to design something that's got like seating and shelving for books and a little desk to work in. And then we can take it from there and produce the whole design and then build and install it. We can also be approached by architects or interior designers or other furniture companies who would hire us to just produce the physical thing that they had already pretty fully designed themselves.
Right.
And that I would consider to be just fabrication. That's us getting hired by someone who has designed a thing that wants us to actually produce it. And then, And then the thing that we're trying to do more and more, which we already do a good amount of, is just designing our own lines and collections of furniture and then selling and promoting them.
What would you say what brings the three of you together? Is there an aesthetic that makes sense collectively?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting thing. And I don't know, I can't put my finger on when it happened and what came first, but we've spent so much time together, also just working alongside each other for so many years. I feel like unconsciously our own kind of design aesthetics have found ways of interacting with each other where you can tell like which one of us, if you knew us and knew our like past work, you could see which person would be like primarily responsible for which product. But I feel like they've all found their kind of complements to each other in a way that's, I don't know, it's kind of exciting because I feel like a few years ago when we were talking about doing this collaboratively, that wasn't really there. And I feel like it did kind of happen organically.
Interesting. And do you mostly see advantages to that union?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Honestly, like all of this stuff is really overwhelming and scary, and like especially coming from, you know, nothing even close to like a business background or like a marketing background. Like, you know, I had to learn about what New York State tax laws were and like labor laws and all these things that like you don't really consider when you're trying to start out doing something like this, that end up consuming like your whole life when you first start. I think being able to like lean on each other and like divvy up the burden of that kind of stuff was huge for us. And also being able, like in the design process, it's really important being able to bounce ideas off of each other and, you know, have like design charrettes and like the ability to critique each other and improve upon each other's stuff, and then take it and, you know, evolve it into something totally different. I think that's like really where my favorite things that we've made have come from.
Do all three of you have similar backgrounds?
Yes and no. I would say, yeah, like Toby is more from an architecture background. He went to Stanford undergrad for architecture and also studied art. James went to RISD and was really focused on like sculpture and metalwork specifically. And that, I would say, has kind of defined our roles. It's hard to say that exclusively just because, you know, we're a really small company and every day we're wearing like a bunch of different hats. But yeah, like Toby, I would say, leads the digital fabrication and like CNC work. The CNC is like really his baby. And James handles metalwork when it comes in. We don't do a ton of it, but we do from time to time. Like we made a big staircase a couple years ago, and occasionally we do some smaller scale metalwork, especially as like little additions to furniture that we're producing.
Gotcha.
And then, yeah, my background's like woodworking and furniture making and stuff. So I
can't recall, did you ever have interest in the more fine art aspect of making? Yeah. I mean, I still make art for myself, and you know, we often talk about just because the lines are so blurry now. Yeah, what do you mean by you make art for yourself? What would that mean in this instance?
Yeah, I guess I would define it as something that I wouldn't try and ascribe like a functional use to beyond its existence as a thought piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, beyond that, like James and Toby are producing like sculpture and art as well. And we've been talking a lot about not necessarily limiting like when we're coming up with like a design language and like kind of aesthetic for furniture series, we're also talking about ways to just have them be sculptural objects or like a wall hanging or things like that, where it doesn't necessarily have to fit into a neat little box.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, left to your own devices, you would still seek to have some functionality within your objects, I assume.
Yeah, and I think that I've been trying to understand myself, like why I'm so excited by furniture and by design and by functional objects. And I think for me, I find myself the most creative and the most like imaginative when I'm operating inside of a box, like when I'm operating in confines.
Sure.
If I'm like given a certain criteria for what something needs to do, then I can think about all the ways I can like bend and break those rules And when I'm just looking out into this like empty void of possibilities where there's just like endless avenues for me to walk down, sometimes I find that to be like really limiting and like constrictive.
Sure. I also think there's something just human about providing function to other humans. It feels good.
Yeah, I agree.
It's hard to describe how good it feels when you, at least from my perspective, when I was used to just making books, comic books, and weird drawings. Of course, you can argue there's some function, but I won't go that far to making things like that. But I mean, literal function is I think deeply underrated in the arts. I don't know. There's some weird snobbish luxury to thinking that, I think, in a sense that there's something lowly about providing function or just building an object that could be rested upon or sat upon.
Yeah, I agree. Like adding utility to an object somehow like degrades its value as an art object. I think that has been like the status quo understanding of really of like craft, of design. And it's so interesting too, because like, you know, in the world of art and design and industrial design, all of that, a chair can be so many things, right? Like it can be a sculpture, it can be functional, it can be totally non-functional and just be like a lumpy, crazy, like fragment of what once was a chair or whatever, you know. Like people are really like pulling and pushing the idea of what art and design can be in a way that's pretty interesting right now. So
I feel like you remember we went to that wedding once?
Yeah, I remember that.
Did we get into a conversation about craft versus art and the history of the word craft? Is that me and you?
Yeah, it sounds like us.
Can you reiterate that? I forget the details, but I remember being very interested. You must have been reading something about it. You clearly had a wealth of knowledge on that.
Well, I'll do what I can to remember.
Let's go.
Like I was smarter a few years ago. But, yeah, I mean, I think really craft, meaning like the kind of like traditional skills of making functional objects and you know, like operating in a tradition of that's like rooted either culturally or geographically to like a way of making is kind of like how craft was understood. And up until recently, and recently being the past like 50 years, because, you know, in like the 70s, there was like the craft furniture, like studio movement, and Wendell Castle and like all of those people, you know, started kind of changing this understanding. But yeah, I feel like, you know, we don't think of like basket weaving, textile arts, like all of those things are kind of just now entering like the art world as mainstream and respectable forms of art. And yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the people historically that were producing those things being, you know, more often like women, people that were not allowed to enter into the upper echelons of academia and art. And it was also just more commonplace and part of everyone's kind of everyday lives in a way that arts, at least in this country, has never really been allowed to be. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I follow. I mean, it also ties into the trades, which is there's a different reason I feel that that's not respected, but it really is that utility thing. Which I think in some ways is fair, you know. I wouldn't call a plumber an artist, I don't think, although there's creative decisions absolutely made. And that's not to denigrate the act of plumbing. It's just
feel the need to call everything an art that is done well. I actually find that gesture strange.
I agree.
Because even fine art is not the peak of human. I don't know. I don't feel that is at the very least, it's debatable. That the finest thing one can do is make fine art.
Yeah.
Although it's fun, I don't know if you have the urge. It sounds like your expression always does manifest some kind of function. Again, that doesn't mean it's not art, but in the stricter sense of the definition, I do think people think fine art is completely devoid of that kind of function.
Yeah. And I don't know. I feel like that is getting more and more like contested because, you see more often when you're going to like gallery shows and stuff, it being this mix of what would traditionally be considered fine art and what would traditionally be considered craft or design or whatever. We're showing a few pieces at a group show that friends of ours are putting on that are kind of joining. I think there's 6 or 7 painters, photographers, etc. They're showing work, and then we have a few furniture pieces in the show, as well as a couple of other people that we know. But their whole concept is making a gallery space that combines art and design objects in a more kind of natural way, like lived in way. And it'll be like a show that is actually at their residence. So they're like setting up their homes as an appointment gallery and stuff. And you can go, like, you can do a virtual tour and then go in person and kind of interact with the work in a lived space instead of in this like pristine white box, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm excited to see it. It hasn't opened yet, but
it reminds me of the Barnes Museum in Pennsylvania. You ever hear that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's deeply controversial because it was basically stolen by the city of Philadelphia and moved, and then became more of like a quasi museum. It's basically a museum, but this is long after his death. But his whole thing was almost strictly educational, but also it was in his house, and everything interacted in a cohesive manner, whether that was rugs, chairs, paintings by Picasso, which seems so obvious. It's like we live in a very atomized world where that sounds radical. It's just like very normal. It's what anyone does in their house when they're thinking about it from like a serious perspective. Having these things click. And I feel like that kind of problem exists within us. I'm not talking about you and I, but when we're trying to express the fullest of our spirit, for me, it took a while to understand that I needed some of this in my life in terms of fabrication and more functional design to feel like a full human at the end of the day. Because they feel separate, but they're not separate. If anything, the thread is just me doing those things in a lifetime. This is enough of a thread. I don't need to like have a predictable, I don't know how to even describe it, specialized, easily summarized life in a way when it all goes away.
Yeah, I understand that. Honestly, I feel like if it takes a few paragraphs, then you're doing a good job, Yeah.
Well, it's not easy from a branding perspective. It's kind of why I'm asking you some of these more maybe obvious questions, but because the fabrication company I run with my partner, it's probably 4 years old now, and we're maybe getting to a similar place that you're describing. But we're often sitting here as people who we didn't go to school for it. We didn't, we don't know architects, and we don't know the jargon, and we're trying to describe to just normal people what we do. But then also we're trying to describe it in a way that's concise for the internet at large. And it isn't always obvious how to, I wouldn't say reduce, but distill what can often be an explosive practice when you have a CNC machine, because you could basically be starting a new business every week, and the temptation is there. It's actually the danger. Its potential is really great. So all these little words: experiential design, design build, fabrication, I'm just a carpenter, like this, like they all evoke a very different thing. And I do find trying to brand whatever it is you and I do, if you and I do a similar thing, I'm not even sure I think we do in some ways, it can be very challenging for me, at least, because of the level of ignorance I have towards like the actual industry.
I mean, I've been trying to understand it for a decade, and I'm trying my best, but still not fully succeeding, you know? I feel like all of these little carve outs and like special terminologies, it's kind of just a way to focus in on a different aspect of things. You know, like I feel like if you call yourself a fabrication shop, at least my understanding of what that means is that your bread and butter is just making other people's visions reality. You know, like that's what you love, that's what you do. Baked into that is a lot of like engineering challenges and like troubleshooting and brainstorming ways to actually make the thing. If you're given like a napkin sketch of, you know, some crazy sculpture or whatever, your joy, your passion, the whole thing that you're doing comes from making that into a thing that can actually exist and stand on its own and be interacted with.
Right.
I feel like, yeah. And if you call yourself just a furniture designer, I feel like the implication of that means that you're not touching the material, you're not actually involved in the manufacturing of your stuff. And I've always been attracted to both of them. And I feel like because of that, we struggle in figuring out how to describe what we do, what we're interested in doing. I think
that's true.
I think if I was only able to do one of those two things, I would be upset about it. That said, the market and the industry, I would say, isn't really as accommodating to someone who's offering both on a like boutique scale, you know?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's 8 billion people, and it's hard enough to know what they're all doing if they're doing one thing. But if they're all doing 8 different things, it's just a simple heuristic for understanding what the hell's going on, and people don't like risk. So if they know you're a carpenter who's literally just been making the same chair for 50 years, they're like, oh, there's no real risk there. I know what this guy can do. So
for sure.
There's that interesting thing of trust, I find, where, you know, I have a similar experience. Like when I have worked with some architects, it was a little initially shocking to me how, what would you say, how zoomed out they were, and how like they actually didn't address things that were really simple and mundane that I eventually did have to address. And I actually thought that was part of their job. And then I later learned like, oh no, it's not. Like they're really just zoomed out and thinking in these like platonic realms about what the thing should be. Yeah. And then when the boots hit the ground, like there's all the annoying shit, all the reality. So you're just marrying the ideal to the real in the best way you can do it. But there's something definitely lost. You know, for instance, I can design a furniture in AI and Adobe Illustrator and hand it off to my partner, Matthew, and not recognize how annoying it is to put together. But then if I have to put that together, I'll immediately recognize, oh, I should have designed that completely differently here and here. And you just have a holistic understanding that results in a better process for everyone involved. Beyond that, I've just seen contractors and architects they definitely like don't gel often, at least the way we often use them. there's like this weird blue collar, white collar dynamic. That's very funny to me.
Yeah.
All that
Yeah,
to say, I agree. I think it's a superior approach to be holistic, but also it's less efficient, and thus it has issues at larger scales. And there is something to be said for understanding how to delegate and trust individuals who are different than you, as opposed to trying to just be the entire thing yourself. Because although that's incredibly satisfying for the soul, I think it is severely limiting for the team, etc. Does that make sense?
No, it definitely does. And honestly, that's something that we are still figuring out and hopefully doing better at. But yes, trying to do everything will guarantee failure, I would say. Like not being able to delegate and find the people that know what they're doing in the aspects of things that you should admittedly, take a step back from because it's not in your wheelhouse, I think is something that's like a really important lesson, especially when you're just starting out. You have very little in the way of like capital to get things moving and stuff, and you're trying to save money everywhere.
Right. And if you make a mistake in this realm, this is not Photoshop. You can't control Z this shit. Like, if this thing warps or this thing is the wrong dimension and you're on a job site 3 hours away, there's this incredible pressure that's always existed, I guess, but that the computer kind of mitigated, where like any mistake at any part in the process could potentially ruin the whole job. And also natural occurrences could ruin things, or just weirdly shaped floors and ceilings. And of course, everything is uneven. Something you don't even, something I personally didn't even think about that much until building for spaces is like, wow, all this shit is uneven. Of course, because some dude just made it. I mean, that's why it's uneven. I find all that very humbling and beautiful. Also frustrating and horrifying and stressful. But when you get lost in that, because I also work on the computer. Again, if I make a mistake in Illustrator, it can be rectified in half a second. And if you're in that place too long, you do start to develop weird personality quirks and expectations, in my opinion. I think it's actually unhealthy.
Yeah, I think it is wrong how easily perfection can be achieved in like a 3D modeling program. And it's honestly, I would say like to the detriment of designers who don't have the experience that you're describing. Like so many people that I worked for in the past would frustrate me, not because they were incompetent or not good at what they did, but because they were never taught how to design from the understanding of how to make. And so like you were saying earlier, like if you designed something, your business partner put it together and you looked at it and were like, oh, that looks great, you would never know about all of the mistakes that your design had made that made his life hell to get there. Like it's that education, I think, is like pretty essential for anybody who's trying to design physical objects and stuff. Like having that hands-on experience is really important.
I think for me, I'm like maybe extreme in this sense, but I'd rather someone be like Labius Woods, who never has a building built and they just dream. They're like pure dreamer. They draw these strange landscapes, and maybe in 100 years, someone figures out how to build something like it. Or a person who's like really understands how to build something. And again, what we're talking about is like, it's just a boutique version of what trades people have been doing since the beginning, which is like, it's more obscene that there are individuals who only think about how to build something, and that's their job. Or vice versa. In the past, you had an integrated life just by virtue of probably how technology was, but you basically had to know how to take it from start to finish. And and there was no other option to my knowledge. Like that was just, I suppose I'm arguing against kind of like an assembly line feature of modernity. Not against it per se, just doesn't make my soul sing, you might say, to be a part of that kind of cog-like structure.
I agree. Yeah, I feel really blessed that I'm able to get that kind of more technically complex, like creative work and ability for like self-expression and, just a more like creative outlet, while at the same time getting the spiritual reward of like actually making the physical thing that puts smiles on people's faces, and like, they're eating breakfast around it the next morning. Like that does feel really good. And there's something just like really simple and honest about it that feels good, especially given how confusing living in society currently is.
Sure.
It's just,
or how ungrounded it is. Yeah.
It's just like being able to satisfy somebody's like basic needs for like shelter and comfort, and then also feel like personally rewarded from the way it looks. I don't know. It's something that is really like intoxicating.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's about the grounded aspect where like a cup is so, I don't know. I think there's certain cultures that just get this. I could be like romanticizing Japanese culture, but to me, it looks like they design everything with focus and understanding and a kind of holistic sense of what the thingness is, like what the cup is and what the cup serves in and of itself. And each thing kind of has this respect towards it. At least that's how I encounter their design, whether that's advertising, posters, signage, furniture, etc. And there's something in American culture that I don't know, maybe it's just like that, it's like efficiency to get things cheaper, but there's like a disposability that promotes that ungrounded feeling. I mean, if you can throw out something in 3 years, or if you have to because it won't work for more than 5 years, whatever, like that doesn't ground you. But if you have a chair for 100 years, of course that's going to ground you in your home. And even from like a familial perspective, if it is passed down, like I don't think people understand how powerful that is.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I mean, really it's just been a total disconnection from our understanding of the built environment around us. Like I feel like 50, 60 years ago, this book, I don't know if you've ever read Shop Class's Soulcraft. I don't know. That's Matthew B. Crawford. I don't know if you told me to read it. It maybe was you. But that book effectively changed my life in the sense of, I think oftentimes you're being pulled along a path and then you need like an obvious artifact to tell you that you're on that path, like a book that says what you haven't been able to articulate. And Matthew B. Crawford 100% validated for me the shift that occurred when I started to focus on functional objects and fabrication. So if that was you, thank you. If it wasn't, it's all good if it wasn't. But I feel like
I'll take the credit. I don't remember, but
I think it was. I think I'm gonna give it to you.
Right
no, it's my other good friend Tim Lyons, who was interviewed on here. But you would be great friends. He's a great dude. Matthew B. Crawford, super important. But go ahead, go say what you think about Matthew.
Well, I mean, there's lots of great moments of that book that I can talk about, but one of the ones that I found like the most interesting was the difference in like owner's manuals and brochures for products and how that has changed. Like in the 50s and 60s, like back when people, back when Shop Class was funded in this country and people, all people had some kind of technical knowledge and understanding for how to
maintain, refurbish, and restore the things that made their lives function. And in that era, when people were shopping, they weren't just looking at the like superficial advertising promos. They would actually be flipping through like exploded AXO schematics of like how these things functioned, and the selling points for the products would be like talking about how much like solid steel components were like precisely machined in such and such component for the thing. Like there was just a level of like technical knowledge and understanding that your average American had that no longer is even close to the case. And granted, a lot of that also has to do with the fact that everything runs off of computer chips, and that really abstracts our understanding of like just intuitive functionality of products and stuff. But it was just really interesting to me, you know, it's like.
Yeah, it's like a collaboration. It speaks to a society that was in some way collaborating. Like, here's the thing, I respect that you might actually understand it. If it breaks, this is how you fix it. I'm not just like creating an opaque black box. Like I think Matthew B. Crawford speaks about this in Why We Drive, if that's the name of his latest book. Yeah, it is. About like the danger of where automobiles are heading. And it's mostly about, what would you say, like automated driving, but also the fact like when you lift the hood on certain newer vehicles, like there's nothing any normal human could even figure out in terms of like how to fix something.
And intentionally so. That's honestly,
exactly.
It's like a selling point now for products to look futuristic and otherworldly. Basically, as successfully as you can, like obfuscate how something actually functions, the more like mystical and impressive it is to like your average consumer now. And I just feel like that is a crazy way to understand the things that you use on a day-to-day basis that like make your life work.
Yeah, I mean, it's trite, but it's kind of like a Wall-E situation. That's just a very concise movie, Wall-E. But
it's good. It's good.
Yeah, it's funny for you to call it mystifying. It's an interesting way to think about it. It seems like overly complimentary to what's happening in this situation, because I view it as kind of dystopian, and I know you're saying you're on the same page, but yeah, I mean, I look back at the men in my grandfathers, and to me they seem exceptional, but I mean, they may have been in some ways, but I also think they were just the dudes of that generation who could build things. Like my grandfather built houses his whole life with no real training. He just like taught himself, and that's the house I grew up in. And my other grandfather could fix like tiny watches for people. I mean, watches are, they're tiny, but just like looking at his tools are just, it's like insane. How precise and tiny the gears are, and I don't know. It's just a lot can be said about the kind of weird panopticon we live in a lot of different ways, and the kind of black box quality to a lot of objects. It's almost partially why I kind of enjoy IKEA objects, because I'm like, it's a real interesting design challenge to be like, here's a thing you think is cool and good looking and functional, and you're going to go home and put it together. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if your grandfather's house do you know if it was a Sears catalog home?
No,
the house that he built?
I don't think so. This man built like hundreds of houses, so I don't. Okay. And he has like a very particular style, which it's interesting. Like I've never even thought about this, but I've lived inside of his mind, essentially. My parents still live in that house. I lived on a street he built and then was later taken by the state, because I think it's the process. Like you could like pave a street and build it out, etc. And then like after a certain amount of years, it would eventually go to the state. And it's like 20 minutes from here. It's named after his first granddaughter, so my cousin. And I don't know if that's, I mean, that sounds pretty exceptional, but my point being just like, even nowadays when a dude seems to know what he's doing as a handyman, it's usually like some weird fetish of getting wild ass tools that are just like crazy. And
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, you know, and there's something to be said for having the right tool. Like I definitely learned in the past 4 years that like, oh, like it's very important to have the right tool, to know how to use it, you know? But I do find that most people yeah, you know what I'm talking about? There's like kind of this weird, it's just consumerism, I suppose. It's just another wacky ass tool to own.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you are like bombarded with the same amount of targeted tool advertising as I am, just because of the shit that we do. But yeah, I mean, we could do a whole other interview just about how insane the advertising around tools is, just in general, because yeah, it's.
What do you mean by,
crazy.
which aspect do you think is particularly insane?
Well, I think the target demo for like tool promotional videos is if you like flame decals, screaming guitar solos, just getting showered in sparks for no apparent reason, you know? It's just like somehow like the Poison era of like hair metal is still like sick, reigning supreme amongst like tool marketers in a way that is pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I never thought about this, but like the aesthetics of that versus like a guy like my grandparents and their tools. There wasn't like I don't know if you could even call it the advertising to have aesthetics. It just seemed like it was like, this is the tool and it's in a catalog and this is what it does. But it didn't imply some kind of lifestyle.
Exactly. That is the part of it that I find the most reprehensible currently. You know, it's like, it is crazy to me that like, I don't know. And it's also just like chintzy bullshit more often than not. It's like this just molded plastic that's going to come apart on you. And to do like a specific one singular task that like if you actually knew what you were doing, you would be able to do really easily using basic instruments, you know?
Yeah.
Like just weird measurement things for like, I don't know. I don't need to get into like minutia, but yeah, it's just it's like selling machismo in this way that's like really upsetting to see sometimes, and also really funny too.
Oh yeah, well I suppose when they strip whoever they may be, when everything has been stripped from you, be it even life itself, they have to sell it back to you. So that's why I think they have to sell lifestyle back to you, because people don't even have that. I'm not trying to be like overly pessimistic. I just think it's kind of true that there's some subtle robbery at play. And it's like when I talk about community, people are like talking about building community. It's like, yeah, in the past, people just had communities. They didn't, it wasn't a conscious effort. And in my struggle to build communities and succeeding and failing at times, like I had that realization, like, oh, this was like an organically emerging thing. And now I'm like putting it on. Anyway, this leads to a different question. Like, what scale would you want for your company ultimately?
I think, and we've talked about this. I think there's a certain point where if you're, successful enough or in demand enough that people are wanting so many of your products that you're not able to keep up with it without scaling into a giant factory and just becoming like a production warehouse.
Yeah.
You have to make a choice where you're either scaling back your in-house production and focusing on just doing prototypes and custom work and then partnering with a larger fabrication shop. And that's also kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's like, then you are looking for somebody that has scaled up and really focused in on the fabrication aspect of this type of work, you know, where, yeah. And there are like a number of really famous companies that do this for like very big name designers and artists and stuff, like De La Espada in Portugal, Mixma in Mexico, or the two that just jumped to mind. But yeah, partnering with a company that really loves the just production work of like realizing someone else's vision, and then focusing in yourself on just making new iterations, new ideas, and realizing those physically, you know, like you're still tied to the work, you're still building the things, but maybe you're only building 1, 2, 3 of those things before you have a fully realized concept that you can give to somebody else and they can run with it at scale.
So are you implying that you would prefer a smaller company that then delegates appropriately?
Yeah, like I never want to be in charge of like 50 people. I never want like a massive production space. And especially being based in like New York City, it's just, it balloons on you so fast, like the overhead and the risk and like all that crazy stuff. Cause like, you know, we're a company of like 5 people currently. And it's still crazy just to keep the lights on and like do this type of really like floor space intensive work in a place where the price per square foot is as much as it is, you know? I think do you
have a number that, because I think about this a lot. My one brother has a company that's probably over 100, I don't know, 50 people. And, you know, there's like interns, he doesn't even know who they are. Like logically, he can't keep up with all this, but like, there's like this, I'll call it an Amish moment where you have to decide, like, you know what I'm saying, in the sense like we're going to stick with horses here. We're not going to move on to these super efficient machines. But do you think like 15 people would be too much?
I think that is like the absolute upper limit of what I can really conceive of. And, you know, if we talk again in a couple of years, maybe my whole tune has changed. But in terms of like how I kind of see us progressing, I would much rather have us stay small and really, really grounded in the creative work and less so in the production aspect of things. That said, you know, I don't think the creative work will be as good if we are completely removing that physical production work from our day-to-day lives. Like I think that is essential to our process, but I don't necessarily think rote repetition is beneficial. And if that's where we get to, at least with certain designs that are more successful, or like if the price point is lower, so, you know, any number of things, then yeah, I think it's in our best interest to give that to a company that just wants to cook and just crank things out in a way that we would prefer to stay at a scale that we can't do that as efficiently, you know?
Yeah. It's really about picking your battles wisely in respect to where you want your humanity to shine. And it's, it is not simple.
I will also say that there's ethics and politics involved in that decision and stuff too. You know, it's like, we're not going to be bargain hunting for the most exploitative factory practices around the world. Like I'm not going to try and have a bid for the lowest amount of human dignity given to the workers at a place. If we were going to partner with them, I would need to know like very intimately how they operate, what their structure is, and really trust pretty pretty confidently that everybody was benefiting from the collaboration. You know, like I wouldn't want to, and I know of other, like, you know, it is tempting, and I know of other like design companies that their model is really like doing prototyping and iterations and stuff, and then finding who can make the most for the least, and then cranking them out as cheaply as possible, you know. And it's, I mean, hell, they're going to do better than us, but yeah, that's not really where my head's at with.
Well, I think I once read a book on this about, it was basically just like, you will not win any efficiency model war in America. Like, if you're building an object that's pretty simple or can be replicated in China or elsewhere, you're eventually just going to lose. And thus the only thing you could succeed in is a brand that's based on innovation. And the way he distinguished that concept, which is very useful, is you have a brand predicated on innovation when the consumer cares about where it came from. Whereas with an efficiency model, you know, you can get some doohickey from China for like $2, and if it serves that function and the consumer likes it, and they don't care where it came from. And so I think for us, that's really and that's a blessing, right? But he's also saying the trade-off there is you can rarely sell companies predicated on innovation to other people down the line, because the soul it's entangled with the very thing itself. Whereas if you build an efficiency model, you can essentially sell that assembly line to someone who wants to buy it in 5 years, or you could sell it off. You could have like a chain or something. And so there's the rub, is like, if you want any soul in this game, there's of course a sacrifice. And that would be like, you can't be as efficient, and you have more skin in the game. Like, if you walk away, the whole structure collapses. It's not some machine running off into the wild, you know?
Yeah.
And it's scary, but it's the truth. It's just the cold hard truth of the approach, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So I feel you on that. Like, I mean, we've all seen it, right? With things we love or companies we think are high quality, like probably the soul, the individual who really loved it, they moved on for whatever reason, either physically or they found different interests, and they coast on those years where they have that efficiency model built and they're making money, and then it just slowly goes downhill as other people control it that don't understand the very nature of what it was special in the first place. So they're kind of just cashing out, and hopefully, if they are, they're putting that money they made off it into something better, but that might be a little too optimistic.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm talking about this stuff like theoretically, because we've discussed it, you know, like internally, of like, how do we grow this? How do we get to next levels and stuff? And I do, you know, I'm interested to see how it feels and what we're able to find in terms of a theoretical like partner for production work like that, you know, like, because I know of a good amount of shops that are like kind of the right size for us to partner with, that are, you know, all based in the US and seemingly do good, thoughtful work, and, you know, provide good pay and benefits and all of that stuff to their workforce and et cetera. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, like, even theoretically, just giving up a certain level of control on not only just on quality, but like on just how the things you're bringing into the world enter it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, part of the shift for me was I would make books and be very meticulous with the details, and I'd send it off to a publisher, and they would make mistakes, and it would drive me crazy. And that was at a more neurotic period. I've definitely learned to trust people more, and also to be able to communicate, because I probably was worse at communicating then. And by that, I mean communicating to like the most precise detail possible without micromanaging someone. Just being like really aware of the potential risks of things, but while respecting their autonomy. And then I realized, so like I went from that control freak moment of shit, I need to be able to design and build the thing exactly how I want it, so nothing can go wrong, to like, oh wait, this is impossible. Like I need to trust and learn how to communicate and accept my mistakes and other people's mistakes while producing the best thing humanly possible. And I say that because it's not going to be this perfect object.
Mm-hmm.
And just like being realistic about delegating, but obviously like it's a delicate balance like we're talking about, because if it scales up like crazy, I just think the further it is, it's literally away from you, physically speaking, it's so hard to care about the thing. That's true of people too. It's like a long distance relationship with the objects you're building. In my opinion, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
That's just tough. It's tough.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like it's just like natural human nature, you know, the more we can offload from our conscious brain, the less we are forced to care about it, and the more it becomes just like an accepted fact of how things are, you know? So.
Yeah. I mean, I always talk about how like when my car breaks down, we develop intimacy. When he works, there's nothing there. It's just a means to an end. But then when it breaks down, there's all of a sudden there's this great connection between us.
Yeah, because you're caring for each other, you know?
Well, and it's, I don't know, for each other, but yeah, there's a recognition of what's being provided in a tangible way in that moment.
I see it.
Well, so are you reading a book right now?
I'm reading a book right now, but it has absolutely nothing to do with what we've been talking about.
Yeah, but what is it though?
Chain Gang All Stars.
All right.
Have you heard of it?
No. Chain Gang All Stars.
Chain Gang All Stars. And I'm going to attempt to say the author's name, but I'm probably going to fuck it up, so please.
Oh, I see. That's not going to be easy. Yep, I'm looking at it right now.
Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, I believe.
Pretty good, man.
But anyways, the book is really cool. It's like set in the not too distant post-apocalyptic future where American media is like fixated on this new blood sport that like promises prisoners with life sentences freedom if they survive 3 years on what's called the circuit, which is like a pretty classic like gladiator fight to the death circuit of blood sport. But yeah, it's a really cool book, and I feel like the way that they write about like action, it's really exciting and stuff, and then it also obviously has a lot of like abolitionist and kind of political overtones. I'm right at the part of the book that starts getting more into the revolutionary side of things.
That sounds fascinating.
It's fun. It's cool. Has nothing to do with woodworking, you know?
No, but it's nice. Would you recommend it?
I would recommend. Yeah.
There you go.
It's good.
Well, it's a pleasure talking to you. I got to go eat. I think
Always
we sufficiently introduced people to you and the idea of fabricating.
Hell yeah. I hope I wasn't
you
too
weren't,
hard
whatever
to
it
follow.
is. No.
No, it's been great catching up, and I would love to come out and say hey to you guys and see what you're up to.
For sure. I would love that.
All right, man. Well, I'll let you go eat.
Music by Dory Bavarsky and Mingji Chen. Next up, we have Jim, Jamie, James, Bradshaw. Until then.